Oh, hello! Today we're starting a new vlogging project, and that is, I realized that I had a bunch of advanced reader copies of new books that are coming out that involve serial killers in some way or another. So some of these are kind of like traditional serial killer type thriller mystery things. Some of them I think technically are serial killer books just based on the body count. So I thought that it might just be kind of fun to vlog this. What I'm thinking I'm gonna do is I'm gonna film the vlog, and the first part of it is gonna be spoiler free. So I'll just kind of give you my overall impressions of the book as I'm going along. And then I will have a spoiler filled section at the end, and I will make sure to do like all the time stamping below so that you guys can jump ahead for any specific spoilers you don't want to see or that you do want to see. So I will put that in the description box. But the books that I think we're going to cover, and this may be fluid as I get into this list and discover that some of these books are or aren't what I would think of as a serial killer book. I should say, to me, a serial killer thriller, there is some kind of like ritual to how people are being bumped off. So I guess to me, what I mean by that is there are thrillers where there's like somebody dies, and then because of that death, it sparks some other ones which are mostly related to like covering up that crime. Even though there are a series of deaths, I don't necessarily think of those as serial killer books. I more think of serial killer books as like, there's a reason why each of these people are being killed that isn't precipitated just by that first death, or that there's some sort of like ritual involved in it. So we'll see. Some of these I may get into and realize are not serial killer books, and I will let you guys know if that's the case. So the ones that I think could be, that I have as advanced reader copies right now, are Say Goodbye by Karen Rose, which is like a romantic suspense, and it's the third in a trilogy. And all of these books have been about like serialized deaths related to this cult. So I think this could end up still being a serial killer thriller. So we'll find out. Bullet Train, and this is a isolated closed circle mystery, which you guys know I love, but it's really, I think, an isolated closed circle thriller where people are being killed on this bullet train. Apparently this has been like a huge hit in Japan, and it's just now getting translated into English, so I'm excited for that. How to Kill Your Best Friend by Lexi Elliott. Again, kind of an isolated closed circle mystery, but I think it's kind of a thriller. So I think this one could end up being serial killer-y. My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, which I think is about like a chainsaw serial killer. Here's hoping. And then I can't remember what this is called right now, but it's the one that's coming out from Grady Hendrix called like the Final Girl Support Group, the Last Final Girl Group, something like that. And it's like a support group for the final girls of different serial killers. So that one I'm pretty sure is a serial killer book. And then The Stowaway by James Murray and somebody else, I forget who, which again is an isolated closed circle thriller set on a cruise ship. So I think that it might be a serial killer book. We'll find out. So anyway, like I said, I'm gonna vlog, no spoilers, just sort of my impressions as I go at first, and then I will do spoilers at the end. And I just thought this might be fun since I had so many advanced reader copies this year that I felt like possibly could fit this theme. You guys know I love a good serial killer trope, so I think this will be fun. Okay, I've got kitty cats here, and first book is down. So I finished The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix in pretty much a day. I flew through it, I could not put it down, and I really, really like this. So first question, is this an actual serial killer book? I'm going to say yes, it is indeed, because, and I was pretty sure it was. It's basically the final girls from several serial killers from the 80s and 90s who get together for a support group. I believe this is taking place in like 2010-ish. So the oldest among them are probably in their like early 50s, and the youngest are probably in their late 30s. They are getting together, but they're all kind of at a breaking point with the group. They each have their own kind of coping mechanisms of how they dealt with what happened to them. And our point of view character, Lynette, her reaction is hyper, trying to control everything. All of them, I should say, also got a sequel. So they were all initially serial attacked, and then like a la a slasher movie, there was a sequel where somebody else tried to kill them again. So they've all got 2 attempted murders against them under their belt. So our main character, Lynette, she's already had this happen to her twice, and she's like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, never again. So she is really fixated on her routines and trying to like always know what's going on, always have an escape route just in case something's happening. And then at the very beginning of the book, one of their members is killed, and Lynette is convinced that it's all starting over again, but nobody will believe her. So I will say, love Grady Hendrix' writing style. I'm obsessed with it. It is so bingeable. I cannot put it down. His humor, which is very cheeky, really works for me. Just like the way he writes female characters, I think is really well observed in the sense of like, he doesn't make them, he doesn't fall into the like Madonna whore trap of like all good or all bad and like centering their goodness or badness around their sexuality, which is a trap I think a lot of male writers fall into. He never does that. His characters, his heroines are always really flawed, but in like believable ways. And I really felt that with Lynette in particular, that she was like, you might think she was kind of a bad person, but you also have a lot of empathy for her because of what she's gone through and how clearly traumatized she is from it. The only connection she has outside of her support group is that she has a plant named Fine, who is literally the only friend she has, and she like anthropomorphizes him in her head, and it's really pretty sad. So anyway, I think the plot itself, a lot of people will probably think is very improbable. I think that's on purpose though. I think it's meant to be kind of banana pants the way that serial killer slasher movies are, like Scream, the Scream franchise. You don't necessarily feel like those are super plausible storylines, but the whole point is to like sweep you away. There's definitely a suspension of disbelief that needs to come into play. And you know, if you can't go along with it, fair enough, but I will just say, if you're looking for like something that is really realistic, I don't think that's the project of this book. It's meant to be quite over the top, campy in a way, but I just had such a good time in it. So I will talk about spoilers at the end, but for now, I'll just say 4.5 stars. This is one of my favorite things I've read this year. I really, really like this. And if you are someone like me who likes some of those old slasher films, I think that this will like hit a lot of pleasure buttons for you, because it definitely did for me. So first one down. Okay, just checking in. I did read Bullet Train, and while I thought it was fun, it wasn't my favorite, but it is not what I would describe as a serial killer book, so I'm not gonna include it beyond this in the video, but just FYI, I did read it. I think it's like a, sort of like it's very cinematic, maybe is the way to describe it. I don't know that it worked fully for me as a book, but it was an interesting story, and I will definitely see the movie whenever that comes out. Book, so-so, story overall was fun, but not a serial killer book. So I am moving on. Hopefully the next book will fit the parameters better for this video. So officially have finished How to Kill Your Best Friend by Lexi Elliott, and I can officially chalk this one up as another not really a serial killer book. I really enjoyed it. It's a fun thriller with kind of an isolation trope, but kind of not. It's sort of like a we're all on vacation in a pretty remote place kind of setting, and there's like secrets from the past and complicated friendship relationships. I think it actually has a lot of interesting kind of themes around friendship that I really enjoyed, but it is not a serial killer book. So we're 1 for 3 so far on correctly identifying serial killer books. Hopefully the next one I come back on here with will actually be a serial killer book. Fingers crossed. Oh my gosh, guys. I am delighted to report that I finally have an actual serial killer book that I have read. You know, this vlog is ending up being basically like, is this a serial killer book or not? Turns out My Heart is a Chainsaw is indeed a serial killer book, as I thought it would be. It is actually quite similar to the Final Girl support group in terms of its, well, okay, let's just do a setup first. So this is by Stephen Graham Jones, and this is what I would describe as literary horror more than like a serial killer thriller, because it is a very slow burn and it is very gory by the end. Our setup is, so like the opening pages, we have this Dutch couple who are out on this ooky spooky lake, you know, get killed, as is wont to happen in this kind of book. And then we have our main character who we're really following named Jade Daniels, and she is kind of like a slasher movie aficionado. We get these really cool little essays from her throughout the book on sort of like the theory of slasher flicks, and she lives with her very abusive piece of shit father, Tab, and basically she becomes convinced that she is in kind of like a real life slasher film. She also becomes convinced that her friend Letha is going to be the final girl. So she's like wanting to try to help Letha survive and like help engineer all of that. It's an interesting book because it's very beautiful in a lot of ways. Like the writing, I think, is quite lyrical, and it's not your typical book like this. I mean, it's so in contrast to Grady Hendrix, for example, that's very purposely leaning into sort of like the campy elements of a slasher, whereas this is very much like a meditation on violence. I feel like it's quite slow in its pacing. So you get like kind of that big opening scene, but and like you get a little bit of build up at the beginning, but then it just really drags. I wonder if this was meant to mimic kind of the pacing of a horror film, like of a slasher, because usually that is the case in a slasher as well. Like you get a couple of big scares, but it's a lot of like anticipatory build to sort of like this big climactic action scene towards the end. And I would say that at the very end of this book, you do definitely have like a lot of gore, a lot of like thrills happening. So it does ultimately deliver on that piece of the story, but it's a long road to get there, and I don't know that I was bought in enough to the book to love that. Like it's not, so like Grady, again, I feel bad for constantly comparing this to Grady Hendrix, but they're very similar. It's like they're the same idea, but in slightly different genres, like subgenres. It's interesting to read them so close together. But Grady Hendrix, his writing is so propulsive, like it's very readable, it's very bingeable, and that's not really what Stephen Graham Jones is trying to do. Like that's not the project of the book. The project of the book is to be more meditative and literary, and I just don't know that that was what I was expecting, and therefore I don't know that I picked it up at the right moment to like be in the right headspace to get on board with that. Does that make sense? So anyway, I think it's doing what it is trying to do quite well. I just don't know that that's exactly what I wanted to read. Like I was wanting to read more of a thriller rather than literary horror. Does that make sense? Anyway, I think it's pretty good for what it is. My first outing with him, I'm going to actually be reading a different horror novel from him called The Last Final Girl in October, because that is a book club pick. So I'm gonna get to read another horror novel from him, and I will be interested. It's much shorter, so I wonder if I would do better with it if it's the same style, because I think it ended up dragging quite a bit, and that was kind of what kept me from absolutely loving it. But anyway, I am happy to at least report that I have like an actual serial killer story that I've read for this vlog, so that's at least a win. Alrighty, I actually have 2 more serial killer books to report on. Excitement. So one of them I accidentally read, not realizing it was a serial killer book, and that is Murder is Easy by Agatha Christie. I was rereading it as a part of, basically I've read all of Agatha Christie at this point, but there were 4 of her books that I just did not remember enough about them to put in my overall ranking. So this year I have been rereading those 4 books so that I can do a complete ranking of all of her Agatha Christie books, not her Mary Westmacott ones. Anyway, so I was rereading that and I had totally forgot that it was a serial killer book. Now, this is a good example of a serial killer book where the serial killer has a pattern that is personally motivated. I guess this might be a good point to talk about, because actually the other serial killer book we're going to talk about after this is also a variant on the trope. I think of there being kind of 3 tropes of serial killer-ing in thrillers / suspense books. One is probably my favorite version of a serial killer book, where it is kind of random killing, but the killer is killing in a pattern. So like maybe, I don't know, he's killing people who, and I say he because let's be real here, he's killing people who were born on the same day in the same city. The characters are like trying to work and figure out what ties all the victims together, and they eventually figure that out, and then you have to figure out like why is it that that is the pattern he's following. So like that's one variant and probably my favorite. Murder is Easy is what I would describe as the second variant, which is there is a more personalized pattern to the serial killing. So the victims are not chosen at random in the same way. Like, and I get that in the first version, victims are not exactly random, but they do fit like some sort of criteria for the killer that at least appears to be random until you dig into it more. In the second variant, it appears to be random until you dig into it more, and there's like a personal motive as to why people are being serial killed. So like, I don't know, let's say you find out that the solution to this story is that all of these people screwed over somebody at college. back in the day. You're finding out that this serial killing is a way to get revenge on all those people. So like that's a more like personalized serial killer motive, and that's what Murder is Easy falls under. And then the third is sort of like what I would describe as serial killer because you are some sort of like professional serial killer. So it's kind of like an assassin slash hired killer, or it's kind of, it is like kind of the second version, but a more professionalized version of it. So the motive may not necessarily be personal animus towards the people. It's more that like these people are all informants and you need to kill them all for that reason, or you're trying to get money to kill them. Like, does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining that last version. These are all very similar tropes, but I do see slightly different types of books associated with each of these. So anyway, all that to say, Murder is Easy is that second variant. So that we know this person is serial killing, and we know that there's probably a personal motive to it, but we don't know what it is. So the setup is basically that this little old lady from this small English village, and I think it's like 1939, is on her way into London to tell Scotland Yard that she has figured out that somebody is serial murdering all of her neighbors and making it look like accidents. And on her way into Scotland Yard, she is run over by a car, and she had told the guy she was in the train with on her way there why she was going to do that. He finds out that she was killed, and then he also sees in the paper a couple weeks later that the person she told him she thought would be next was next. So he, like, through machinations, goes down to like investigate undercover, and we're trying to solve the crime from there. So I actually really liked the first 2/3 of this book a lot. It is classic Christie. You are getting like Christie English village vibes, 4 days. You also have this potential like occult element, which she likes to throw in from time to time. It pretty much never is that the actual thing that's going on for the most part, but it's a fun little Christie element. We have the obligatory love story, which a lot of her books have, which I'm not mad at. I know a lot of people don't like that in these books, but I'm not mad at that. And then it's just like whodunit. So it had all of that and more. I think that the solution of the mystery was good, but I think the way that it unfolded over the last third was not very satisfying, and it ended up feeling quite maudlin and like overwrought. So I would give it, it knocked it down from a 4-star for that reason. Like I think this is like a 3.5, but in terms of like pure enjoyment of Christie vibes in a serial killer type story, this was fantastic. The other one that I read was Say Goodbye by Karen Rose. Now this is the third in a trilogy, and I don't think that you can read this book without having read the prior two. So this is a serial killer more in the vein of like, I need to kill these witnesses kind of a thing. So there's and it's a suspense. So we know who done it. We're watching them stalk their prey for a lot of the book. And it also is tied into this cult that we get introduced to in the first 2 books. So if you like a cult thriller, not O-C-C-U-L-T, I mean A-C-U-L-T, a cult thriller, these books have that, and I like that. That's an element of a thriller that I enjoy. This is also a romantic suspense, so there is a strong love story in this one, and I really, really like that. That was actually probably my favorite part of the book because it was a slow burn, friends to lovers, which is like one of the only angsty tropes in romance that I 100% get down for. I cried, I loved it, so that really worked for me as well. So yeah, all in all, both of those I do think are serial killer books, but they're maybe not your conventional, like, they're type 2 and 3, not type 1. And I will say type 1 is my actual favorite of the serial killer type tropes, but I still enjoy a type 2 or 3. I just like a serial killer book all around if and when I can get them. So we are finally reading some serial killer books. I think I have a couple more that I'm gonna read in the next few weeks, so I don't think that this is the end yet. So stay tuned for more. Okay, so I think this is the last book I have to tell you guys about. That is The Stowaway by James Murray and someone else. This is pretty pulpy, pretty straightforward commercial fiction, a commercial thriller that is a serial killer trope. This is definitely a serial killer book, so 100% that is a thing. So the setup for this one is a cool setup. It is that there was this trial for this kind of notorious child serial murderer named Wyatt Butler. It was pretty clear he did it, but there was like some ambiguous evidence, and it comes out that our heroine who is on the jury, there is a mistrial, basically, because 11 of them find him guilty and one of them says not guilty. There's like a ton of public outrage about that, and the parents of the children who were murdered start basically harassing all of the jurors, trying to figure out which of them said not guilty. And I think it's her name Maria or Marina, I forget which one, or Mariana, something like that. She eventually decides she's going to come forward. She has like a press conference, says like, hey, I'm the one who voted not guilty. I do think he did it, but I felt like I couldn't say beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. So from that, she becomes kind of a pariah. She's a professor of psychology at Columbia, but she ends up being kind of forced to take a leave of absence after she has like this outburst. And anyway, cut forward towards the end of her forced sabbatical. She's going on this cruise ship with her 2 children, and who was her boyfriend now is her fiance, Steve. And on this cruise ship, she becomes convinced, people start dying, and she becomes convinced it is Wyatt Butler on the loose coming after her for reasons unknown. So it's a pretty fast moving thriller. It's not very long. It's like one of those books where if you just want that trope of a serial killer distilled into its very pure form and just get like a hit of the trope, this will definitely give that to you. I felt like the characterization was so flat that I just had no emotional stakes in anything that was happening. And therefore I would probably give this like a 2.5 star, which for me is like a C+ B-. Like it gave me that serial killer thrill that I enjoy. Like it definitely delivered on that piece of things, but I just felt like it was quite flat. Yeah, like it was just a very forgettable kind of book. Now, if the setup appeals to you, and like I said, I do think it's a cool premise, and you're just looking for something like fun, entertaining, probably not going to stick with you, but like just a good time, I think this book will definitely do that, but I wouldn't say it's like particularly excellent. So, I think that was all the books I was going to read for this. I will check back in with you guys to wrap things up. I may, because I'm trying to think, when am I posting this? There's a chance I may read another serial killer thriller between now and when I post that. So if I do, I'll pop back in with that. But otherwise, I'll check back in with you guys to wrap up and to do a spoiler section for the books that actually did end up being serial killer books, to talk about what I did and didn't like about them. Okay, so I think it is time to wrap up this little blogging project. Some mixed results here. A lot of the books that I thought were going to be serial killer books turned out not to be, well, maybe not a lot, but like a third of them were not serial killer books. So we're like 66% hit rate on correctly identifying this trope. I did also read one bonus book I wasn't planning to read, so all in all, we have 5 books to talk about. And this is a section where we are going to get into spoilers. Check the description box if you want to skip ahead or not hear a certain spoiler, but otherwise, I'm about to let her rip, so this is your warning. So my least favorite of these books, I would say, was The Stowaway by James Murray and Darren Wearmouth. I actually did like this book in terms of it was just light, fun, serial killer thriller, good times. I don't think it's a very memorable or particularly well executed version of a serial killer book, but if what you're in the mood for is like a true serial killer, random dude with like a revenge type motive for the serial killing, I think that this could be a good shot to the heart of that trope. I will say, I think I was saying this when I was vlogging, but I just felt like the characterization was very flat, and therefore I just didn't, it felt very campy, but not in a purposeful way or like a really fun way, just sort of like in a cheesy kind of way. So part of what like the twist is that the reason why the serial killer is coming after this woman is that he wanted to be found guilty so that he would be immortalized as a serial killer forever. And he's angry that she was the one who hung the jury. And like then the big like reveal is like, haha, I just took the heat for the woman who I knew actually hung this jury. So joke's on you, Buster. You didn't get what you wanted because I'm not even the one you need to take revenge on. That's sort of like the reveal. And then because she is a professor of psychology, it's hinted at that this is going to be the beginning of a series. And I think if you want to have a successful mystery thriller series, you do need to have either like superb plotting and like superb delivery of the mystery history itself, or you need to have characters that we really love, connect with, and root for. And I think that this had neither, so I don't think that this is really a very like exciting beginning to a series. Fine. I will forget this book in a year, but it was fine. I'd say my next least favorite, or like next up on the list, would be My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I think at the time I gave 3.5 stars. I think upon reflection, I'd probably bump that down to 3. And I've been waiting to film this because I wanted to read The Last Final Girl, which is another book from him, and one that basically has the same premise, except that with My Heart is a Chainsaw, it's like a kind of a slasher summer camp kind of setting, and this is a slasher like homecoming dance kind of trope. This is also much shorter, and I liked this version of this story much better because I felt like My Heart is a Chainsaw just dragged way too long. Jade was a very thoughtful character, but I just think that for the kind of story it is, I just didn't need how slow of a build that book was, versus this just sort of like gets to getting. And I did like all of the interstitials thrown in there about the thriller genre, and I like Jade's ultimate realization that like she doesn't need to enjoy slashers to experience the depths of human depravity, because honestly that's what she's living with her dad. Like that's kind of her big realization, and I think that worked really well, especially with her indigenous identity. Like I think that the character stuff was really good, but I think it just skewed far more towards the sort of like character study literary side of things for what I want from a thriller personally. I would say next I'd put Murder is Easy at 3.5 stars, and this is like 3.5 bordering on a 4 because I really do have a lot of affection for this book. Unsurprisingly, it's Agatha Christie. Y'all know how I feel about Agatha Christie. She is my all-time favorite writer. But that being said, I do feel like this particular book suffers for having far too long of a conclusion. So at about the 66% mark, we find out that, so we've been suspecting it's the rich old dude who our female love interest is engaged to and is breaking off the engagement to. We've been getting very heavy-handed that it's going to be him. And I didn't love that as a solution, but I was like, okay, I can kind of go with this. But then we get the reveal that it's actually the little old lady who's been helping them. And that's because she is trying to take revenge on the old dude and like pin all of these murders on him. So it's kind of like a convoluted reason for her to do this, but like I'm into that in a serial killer trope. I'm okay with it being a little convoluted if it's satisfying, and I did think that that was a fun solution. But my problem with this was that it then takes a third of the book for her plot to unfold. And I think you, the reader, figure out it's her at about the 66% mark. And it takes too long for the characters to catch up. So I think that, and then also the romantic pairing at the end is just very over the top. And I think that that is not necessarily very satisfying for a conclusion to a love story. I say this as somebody who does enjoy a romance in her stories. Like, I'm down with that, but this particular one, not so much. Then I would say my second favorite would be Say Goodbye. I gave that 4 stars, and this is the third book. That is the third book in a trilogy that has been happening in Sacramento around this like cult situation. I really think you should not read that book without first starting with Say You're Sorry by Karen Rose, which is a more traditional serial killer kind of book. This actually is one of my favorite serial killer books I've read because I think it really hits what I like in the trope very well, which is a very pattern-based serial killer. And then it also has like this backstory of a cult. So anyway, this one I think is the best of the 3. But I would say that Say Goodbye is my second favorite of the 3. Not so much for the killing aspects, because really it's more of like a serial killer suspense, because we know who is doing all of the murdering, and it is more in the sort of like assassin for hire, or like I'm killing you for a pragmatic kind of reason, not so much like personal animus as much. There is a little bit of that, but it's more just I have to keep my position in this cult together, so that means you guys gotta go. So the dude is trying to like pick off all of these different people around our main characters as well as our main characters. So that is just not as fun to me for a trope as a straight up like, I am just killing in a pattern because that's my deal for some sort of like mental illness reason. I just don't think that's as much what I want from the trope. So yeah, I would say that for me, this one was really good for the romance bit. Like, it's a childhood friends to lovers romance, and it is incredibly angsty, and all of that really worked for me. So I really liked the two of them coming together, but I wouldn't say that the serial killer piece of things was the best part of this book, even though I really liked the book. And I did like how all of the cult stuff wrapped up. I like that they saved them all. I mean, I kind of figured that would happen, but I like that we finally have a conclusion to that, and it is a hopeful one, so that was also great. And then finally, my favorite of this batch of books was definitely the Final Girl support group. I gave this 4.5 stars. This is one of my favorite mystery thriller type things of the year, and what I really loved about this was how meta it was, but in a very different way than My Heart is a Chainsaw or The Last Final Girl, though I think if you liked one of those books, you should try the others because they all have this sort of like meta commentary on a slasher trope. I think what is interesting about this particular book is that it is taking a very meta approach that's humorous. It's not as sort of, it's kind of more in the vein of like a Scream versus Friday the 13th. And I love Scream. So that really works for me when this kind of story has some sort of meta awareness of what is happening trope-wise. Like, that just really works for me. And it has a tongue-in-cheek element to it. I really liked Lynette. I know she is unlikable, but I found her very compelling, and therefore I liked her. I thought it was an interesting character study, what he did in terms of, I really love the way he writes women. I think that he does a good job of making his female characters like nuanced and not all good or all bad. Like, they are more fully realized people, which I think is just the reality and would be great if we could have more of in books that are not written by women. Anyway, I really think that he gets that right, and I really liked all the dynamics within the group. I also really loved the sort of like frenetic pace of this, even if it made it like plot-wise pretty unrealistic. I thought that that was really fun, and I guessed that the girl who that Lynette thinks is going to be the next final girl, I guessed that she was in on it in some way, but I didn't quite figure out exactly how that was going to come together. So I actually really liked that kind of final scene at the summer camp. I thought that that was really fun and compelling. So all in all, I thought that this was pretty great, but I think it's getting somewhat mixed reviews. I think it's polarizing. I think if you don't like the project of this book, like, you just really don't enjoy it. But I was into the project, and therefore I enjoyed his compulsively bingeable prose, and I enjoyed the story. Like, this just really, really worked for me. So with that being said, I think that that will do it for this particular vlog. Definitely let me know what you think about serial killer thrillers in general. Do you love them the way that I do? Let me know what you think of any of the books that I talked about, if you have also read them. And yeah, I also have coming up soon, I think, a commentary style video about serial killer thrillers and why I think I like them and why as a culture we are so into those. So keep your eye open for that if that is something that is interesting to you. So with that being said, I think that will do it for me. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!